Well, we are going to talk about potable water, scarcity, quality, and alternatives. We try to make a not very lots of research. We took some examples from our regions. So the group is me, Ana Cristina, Gil, from Turkey, and Neil is from São Paulo, Micaela, Paula, and Carla. And we just put our presentation in these Sustainable Development Goals, and we are talking about clean water and sustainable cities and communities and life below water. And so we're talking not on wastewater treatment, but on how it reaches the residents and how it's available for everybody. The purpose is to achieve goal number 6 and ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. And regarding scarcity, I found this picture from water disponibility per person in the world. And here in Brazil, we don't have much problem about that, but we see that many countries faces this problem. In Brazil, we have this data from 2013. Maybe it's a bit, maybe we should not update it a bit. But we have in the access to safe drink water, it's for 82.35. What's that one? So she can't.
Oh, is your picture here? Oh. We have only 82.5 people who access to safe drinking water in Brazil right now. As we can see during this presentation, this conference, we have different frameworks, even in our countries, with North and Northeast, with worth realities in order to access to safe drink water. The regions colored by pink and red color face the worth situation in this respect. Respect to access to seawater collection, we have only 48.6% of people, inhabitants in Brazil, who have this kind of access. For sewage treatment, only 39% around in 2013. And to reach the universalization for drinking water and basic sanitation in Brazil, a non-government institute called Instituto Trata Brasil, thought that we have to invest around $303 billion in order to universalization of drink water access. Until this data was to 2015, it passed. Now we have new goals, as Anna said at the beginning of the presentation, to reach until the 2030 date proposed by United Nations.
Well, we use this picture from Christie. Water is the problem can be too much water, and too much water, or too little, or too dirty. Yeah. Okay, so we are talking about the 3 points: too much, too little, too dirty. In some places in Brazil, we have too much. Like in Rio, we had some events in 2011. Too little, as we have in Northeast, we have an alternative showing this problem. And too dirty, we have all over Brazil due to our lack of sanity and this. This slide here shows that in Brazil, 75% of water is located in Amazon basin, but where lives only 5% of the population. So we have this problem. And we also register a loss of up to 6% of treated water for consumption. And effective consume of water, we have this slide concerns the risk about the consumption, And we see that in Brazil, in Amazon, we don't have any problem about that, of course. But in Northeast, we have some regions with medium risk, and in Rio and São Paulo, low risk. It's an average data. Concerning the water crisis in urban areas, this picture shows irregular occupation in lands in Rio with slams, and we start to impermeabilize the surface and reduce the recharge of aquifers. It's a problem. We have natural conditions, maybe affected by global warming. Land use is the one, this picture. It's excessive water demand, so it's something that we have to deal with political actions and education. We're going to talk about it later. And water bodies contamination, not only by sewage, but also our activities in economies in general. We know that in Rio and São Paulo, 72% of contaminated areas are due to gas stations. So we have many points of many sources of contamination that reach the aquifer, and consequently it reach the superficial water bodies. This picture shows two situations in Brazil at the same time, in Acre and in São Paulo, a flood in Acre and a drought in São Paulo. So we have different problems to deal due to our territorial size. The same year in 2014. And how can we change this picture? Water conservation. Use of more efficient hydraulic device. We took this picture from these slides from presentation yesterday. Incentivize the industry to develop and commercialize more efficient products. Development of water efficient industrial process. It happens as long as regulations and law are created. In Brazil, after our national politics for environment, and when water started to be charged for the industry, for captions for the industries, they started to optimize their process. So consequently, we reduced the consumption in industries. Improvement of wastewater treatment technologies. We'll talk about this a bit more when we talk about alternatives. It depends on how much you have to how much you have to spend, and which technology you have available in your country, in your city. And water you use for potable consumption should be the last option, as we discussed here during the workshop. And the lack of planning, what we can conclude is that the lack of planning in urbanized area results in a scarcity problem. So it's not a lack of rain only. It's a lack of all those losses we have here in Brazil. I said it was about 60% some place. So to face these problems is necessary integrated approach for water conservation, use of the advanced wastewater treatment technology and water reuse, and give some focus in technological innovation, mainly for developing countries where sometimes we don't have access to more expensive technologies. So all the efforts for research should be to try to find low cost and low risk technology. Quality,
I will present some issues or some aspects of water quality. The three main problems we are dealing with right now in respect to water quality. According to US EPA, it's water losses, as we learned about it during the conference. Population growth, not only in megalopolis as São Paulo, but in all over the world, and water bodies pollution. So this is the three main problems we can deal with water quality and water supply. Thank you. In order to evaluate water quality here in the University of São Paulo, we have focused our efforts in emerging contaminants compounds evaluation. So it's a question that we are focused right now. We have this kind of situation not only here in São Paulo city, but all over the world, with another source of contamination, point and non-pointed sources of contamination that reach the water surfaces. Reach water surfaces, and they can reach also potable water. Only here in the state of São Paulo, we have in the last 10 years a lot of studies evaluating emerging compounds in potable water. We have more than 10 emerging contaminants present in tap water or potable water. So as you can see, we have this kind of hormone, a natural hormone produced especially by women. They can be available for us by drink consumption, or they can uptake in animals or ecosystems, like this example, for instance, in fishes, and acting in our organism as a disrupting endocrine. So they can cause a lot of adverse effects. Regarding to alternatives, I can share the speech with.
Okay, thank you. Can we move on to alternatives? Anna?
It's all right.
How to go? Okay. Anna, I have already mentioned about these issues, but we need to consider the alternatives in cases of water scarcity, obviously. But as it was mentioned yesterday, fit for purpose is the main issue. It depends on whether you have high technology, high cost. It brings us high cost and low risk. But in some cases, you may have to deal with only low technology, low risk, and controlled risk. In the picture, you've seen that raw water is obtained and becomes drinking water. When I was a student, a professor in our department asked us what is the difference between wastewater and drinking water in centimeters. We couldn't understand that. Yesterday it was asked by one of the professors again. It is only 30 centimeters. As you open the tap, it is potable water, but as it touches the sink, it becomes wastewater. But again, as Kirsty said yesterday, we maybe shouldn't call it wastewater, and we should get use of it. But there are some issues. How can we reuse it? The public perception about it. How can we educate people to use it, in what way and in what risk? So what are the main reclaimed water resources? Domestic wastewater is one of them, maybe the last option, but we may consider it. Grey water, urban wastewaters, industrial wastewater. Some types of industrial wastewaters can be used, and obviously rainwater. Treatment technologies are applied for meeting the criteria, but here the important thing is which specific criteria we are talking about. I'm not going in detail about these, but we want to show you some different examples. One is from Japan. Japan, when I was in Tokyo, I've seen that they are very cautious about their wastes. In, for example, London, everybody talks about the weather. In Istanbul, probably in Sao Paulo, everybody talks about traffic. In Tokyo, everybody talks about waste. And in our last 1 minute, I'll talk about the other alternatives. But I just want to show you this picture here. The toilet is linked to the sink, so the water from the sink, it can be used as to flush the toilet water. This is a picture from Istanbul. This is a Melan project, we call it as short. This is the biggest project in Turkey from the point of inter-basin water transfer. It is 170 kilometers away, and Istanbul just a little smaller than Sao Paulo with 18 million people, of which 13 million people is living on the European side. This water is taken from all the way from Sakarya to transfer to Istanbul. This is my picture, which crosses below Bosphorus. So I was under 135 meters down the Bosphorus. Well, it's kind of river. It is a sea. But we should consider, using technologies to transfer water from other basins in order to save our cities. There's another example which Neil will talk about. Thank you.
This kind of project, called it San Francisco Transposition, it's been a controversial project that ongoing project that we are having right now in Brazil since I think the last 50 years, I think, beginning the transposition. São Francisco River is the fifth biggest river in Brazil. So there's a federal project to transfer this river from here to southeast to the north, extreme north of Brazilian regions. In fact, it's a semi-arid region there that we have in Brazil. And a lot of people in this region faced water scarcity and also poverty situations. So it costed around $4.9 billion, and we have 15 years. It's an ongoing project. But some cities present here in extreme north didn't receive yet one drop of water, even considering the high investment in this project, I think it's what we have for this morning. I would like also, in the name of the other girls and ladies, to say thank you so much for exceeding support us to be here. It's a pleasure. It's a good opportunity for us. Thank you so much for your attention.
Hello. I think we are good to go now. So once more, good morning, and hope you are enjoying your workshop. This is group 3, and as you can see displayed on the board, we had to deal with the theme drinking water, microcontaminants, and microbiological contamination. How pure is safe? Mindful of the small time we had to prepare, we decided to make it a kind of a short story that will leave you at a stage where you have so many food for thoughts, so many questions we have to ask ourselves, and when we go back, we have to get active when it comes to our own contribution towards changing the behavior of the people around us with regards to water management, water handling, water quality. So you have on the board the plan. We're going to start by talking about safe water as we know it, and neglected microcontaminants, which are not usually taken into consideration when we talk about safe water, and which would force us now to look at what we can call indicators of contaminated water and methods of micropollution. What happens? How does the pollution get into the water? We're going to look at sustainable treatment options and how to prevent the pollution. And finally, why not, we will try to look at some recommendations. When you Google on the internet and you ask yourself the question, what are the guidelines for drinking water? Most definitely you will fall on something like this. It is based on two main principles. E. coli, total coliforms. They will tell you about, for every 100 milliliters of water, you should have 0 quantity. With total coliforms, in some cases, they will tell you less than 50 colony forming units. In some cases, they'll tell you less than 100. We realize that in Brazil, it's a bit peculiar because they deal with samples and they tell you for 40 samples, at least 39, that's 95% of the samples, should have 0 for total coliforms. And of course, with E. coli, everything has to be 0. Now, these results are the same for my brother in Vietnam. They are the same for us from Cameroon. They are the same from Mexico. But then, this table will never take into consideration some very important microcontaminants, generally with regards to the method of testing. And talking about these neglected microcontaminants, we have protozoans. I'm sure you're very used to Protoplasma gondii. You're very used to, it's a protozoan. You are very used to norovirus and rotaviruses. You're very used to Bilharzia or Schistosoma, which is a nematode, and others. And of course, what is most common because it colors the water, that's algae. Now, how do we know that these guys are in our drinking water and affect the quality of our water? We need to get indicators, right? So these are some of the things you have to take back home so that when you realize them, you can sound an alarm. There is a problem with the quality of the water we are drinking. What are these indicators? An outbreak of toxoplasmosis would be very clear and very likely that there is toxoplasma in the water, so you have to talk to the people who are treating the water to go back and to revise their treatment options. If you have ascariosis, nematosis, in fact, these are all diseases provoked by worms of the helminth family. I'm particularly interested in Bilharzia because we read that in Brazil, we have about 150,000 cases per year. Now, that's non-negligible at all. And so there is need for them to do something about it. It's not safe. And then we have, of course, diarrhea and disorders, stomach disorders that are as a consequence of algal contamination. When we go to our laboratories and we want to check the quality of water, the general thing that everybody knows that is commonly used is the E. coli test. We talk about fecal coliforms, we talk about fecal streptococci, we talk about, you just need to go to the lab, use the right media, and then you can culture it and find out if these things are present in your water or not. And this is generally contamination of fecal origin. But there is also the PCR test, the polymerase chain reaction, which is cheap. It is practiced commonly, even though it has just it's a detection strategy. We practice it when we want to know if there are microorganisms like bacteria in the water. We have the ELISA-CHEP test, which is almost like the PCR test. But then, these tests are all limited in their accuracy. And the test that has proven to be most accurate, even as we heard in the course of the presentations in this workshop, is the DNA test. Unfortunately, it's very expensive, it's complex, and of course, it's scarcely used. What are the sustainable treatment options? Of course, when you identify pollutants in water, you have to treat the water. And we all know about the disinfectant thing where you use either chlorine or ozone or ultraviolet radiations, and there is reverse osmosis, which is used mainly for particulate and chemical treatment, but depending on the membrane that you use, can also be used for microbiological treatment. And when you do some research on the internet, you'll realize that most wastewater treatment companies use the multiple barrier concept in their treatment, which has 4 main components: the coagulation and flocculation component to remove grit, the clarification to decantate, and of course move to the filtration part, and then after that we will have to add the disinfectants, and then we can distribute our water. This is what people commonly do, but we need to go a little further to prevent the pollution. And by preventing of pollution, we are talking about respecting legislation with regards to environmental norms. We are talking about constant monitoring of the distribution network. This is important because it's possible that at the source, the water is treated, it is not polluted. But somewhere between the source and the consumption, there is a problem. Some microorganisms came in because of a crack or something. We learned in the course of the workshop that studies have proven that even the pipes that distribute the water to the consumers can be themselves a source of pollution. We need to have periodic tests of water. This is where sometimes the water companies fail, because nobody takes the pain to go to the consumer houses to collect samples and to test them, because that would be a very easy way to know if the same water you're sending from the source is the water that they are drinking. Unfortunately, they don't have that. And then they have to monitor infrastructure and equipment, because sometimes the infrastructure of the treatment center is a problem in itself. Why not even have an independent control facility that goes to check these details and that cannot be corrupted? Let us end with some recommendations. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow scientists, you need to go back home as a sensitization agent. It will never be enough to talk about the importance of treating water rightly, because sometimes we place the burden on the treatment company, but the problem is the attitude of the consumers. And it is important for us to also encourage our government and our institutions to embark on education campaigns. Recently in Cameroon, a method was being encouraged, which is the solar disinfection, or SODIS method, which has to do with putting water in plastics and exposing them to sunlight for some time. But there is a controversy with that, because in as much as that method kills microbiological organisms, that method has the potential of polluting the water with microplastics. So this is open for research. We think we have talked enough for us to have some good brainstorm and to have something to take home. So thank you very much.
Okay, so this is our group. Do we need to introduce ourselves? My name is Kirsty.
My name is Sueta.
My name is Juliane.
My name is Maria.
My name is Bernat.
My name is Kahoma.
I actually had them in the right order too. That's amazing. Okay, and our
It's in the same order.
in the same.
We are still in the same.
And our challenge was the lack of sewage collection and treatment in human settlements. So this is going to be relatively short and sweet. What we did was we looked at what that problem statement meant, and we divided it into 3 sort of areas. The first being access to sanitation and the issues of dignity and hygiene, as well as disease prevention that are affiliated and linked to access to sanitation. Then the treatment of sewage or non-treatment of sewage, which leads to many problems with environmental impacts. And then, of course, the links to sanitation and the ability to have sanitation to the recapturing of resources and building, actually getting those resources into cities. So this picture is quite typical. It's a South African settlement, and I think it shows the sort of problems with sanitation, the impact on surface water in the settlement, and also the broader sanitation issue around solid waste and other environmental impactors. Hang on, sorry, I just want to... This is not in the right place. This is what happens when you try and do things quickly. This is just a cartoon. I wanted to try and show how this linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, and that will come later. But the whole issue of providing access to sanitation and showing that you have the numbers of people that supposedly have access does not mean that they have basic access. Many times sanitation facilities don't work, they're not accessible to the people because they may be locked or non-functioning, and certainly there are major problems around meeting the indicators. Okay, so the main issues, thinking about these three themes that we spoke about, that we've raised just now, the first is around public health and dignity, which are, of course, very important issues in terms of access, but also from the burden of disease, from untreated wastewater, and from open defecation. We heard a lot in the last few days about antibiotic resistance, microplastics and emerging contaminants. How do we start dealing with these as major challenges from this lack of sanitation going forward? And then we just wanted to bring in this last one around access that links very strongly to those issues of dignity and human health around safety and around school attendance, for example, how children, the linking of school attendance and safety with access to sanitation for children. Please, team, cut in at any point if you want to add anything here. Okay, so the second issue, the second theme is around environmental protection. And really this challenge impacts very strongly on environmental health. It impacts on biodiversity loss and on ecosystem degradation. So these are major challenges for the planet to have to deal with. The issue of drainage and grey water management, very often not included in WASH, in water supply and sanitation and hygiene. There is often a huge emphasis on providing toilets, taps and toilets, particularly to slum settlements and to unserviced settlements without any real consideration of drainage and of the runoff that comes from these unserviced places, as you can see in the picture here. The idea of cross connections and sewer exfiltration, what happens when sewers leak, what happens when pipe networks are not functioning in the way that they should be, and how does that contaminate water supplies in terms of surface and groundwater systems. And then, of course, we also heard in quite a couple of the presentations over the last couple of days about problems with maintenance of green infrastructure solutions, as well as the conventional treatment systems, which obviously have a lot of impacts. The third one was around this potential for resource capture and the links to water security. And we talked a little bit about this weighing up of whether we go for centralized or decentralized systems, depending on what the outcome is that you want in terms of resource capture or whether you want to move forward. Source separation and resource recovery, this concept of no such thing as wastewater is very important. And then the idea of alternative sources and fit-for-purpose water. Water does not have to be at potable standards, so this is where the reuse of wastewater issue comes in. Here's my SDG picture. So then we thought about the different links to the relevant SDGs, and of course clean water and sanitation is the fundamental one, but it's not the only one. The lack of access to sanitation and wastewater treatment links very strongly to good health, the development goal on good health. It relates to sustainable economic growth, and I'll talk a little bit about that, resilient infrastructure, and also, of course, cities and human settlements. So the purpose of the SDGs, of course, is to have them much more integrated than the Millennium Development Goals. So, in fact, all of them should have some sort of integration with one another, but we felt that these were probably the most important ones. Just a quick... I'll go through where we thought a little bit about how our different regions and countries compared. This is actually just a few countries in Africa. But then we looked at, for example, how much sewage is treated across the countries that we represent, whether there were public or private enterprises involved in wastewater treatment, what the access to sanitation was, how much wastewater gets reused, whether there are local policies and standards in place, and the enforcement. And you can see a sort of fairly wide range of data that came across those statistics. So, proposed responses in my last 3 minutes. From a technical point of view, this notion of dry sanitation versus waterborne, very relevant to context. It can't be put in place as a matter of course because it depends on acceptance issues, it depends on costs, it depends on all sorts of things. Grey water management is crucial. The Brazilian model for basic sanitation, this idea that sanitation has to include water supply, sewage, drainage, solid waste disposal, and vector control is really important. And I think it's one that should be emulated around the world. We're trying very hard to do that in South Africa. Planning, management, and maintenance of wastewater treatment facilities, including green infrastructure, is only really achieved if they're planned properly from the outset and if they're included in asset registers so that you know what you have to maintain. The issues of direct and indirect potable reuse, perhaps through something like managed aquifer recharge with treated effluent. There are many ways of doing this. We should not be stuck to one way. Using nature-based solutions, we've heard quite a lot about that. Constructed wetlands, algal ponds, bioremediation, activated carbon. These are tertiary treatment processes that can deal with many of the emerging contaminant issues that we've had, or that we are about to have. Governance, obviously enabling policy to support this new thinking. Local and international standards monitoring is so important. We don't monitor, I would say, virtually without exception around the world, except perhaps in very well established European places. And monitoring is the only way that we'll know whether the sort of sanitation and the use of wastewater is feasible going forward. Political lobbying, obviously, to address issues of access and relevant enforcement. And then the sort of economic or efficiency feasibility aspects, adequate funding is required. Important to start thinking of integrating these other aspects around, for example, the water, food, energy nexus, particularly for sustainable and productive livelihoods. This is so important in developing economies, to try and build in the way we live to the way we can continue. Public-private partnerships, and then the circular economy concepts, which we've also heard about quite a lot. Julian came up with a quote that every rail investment in sanitation saves 9 rails in health, and this is the sort of indicator that we should be pushing forward. From a social point of view, awareness creating is really important. And something that we found in South Africa, and I'm pretty sure it's been found everywhere else, is that experimentation with new or alternative technologies should not be undertaken on the poor. They should take place in rich communities or in people that can actually bear the burden of that experimentation. Proof of concept should be done then. And then, yes, we are trying very hard to integrate appropriate water and wastewater infrastructure to create these livable cities of the future, including water-sensitive urban design concepts, smart cities, sponge cities, all the things we've been hearing about over the last few days, so that we have cities that are able to cope with all of the challenges that we've raised. Yes, thank you.
Good morning. This is Group 1, consisting of myself, Oloyede Oyebayo, Ahmed Azan, Costa dos Santos Daniel, Stephen Akintayo, and Suza Hugo. Our topic is extreme events, drought, and flood problems and solution. This is the summary of what we'll be discussing here this morning. There's a table that's the summary of the issues on ground, and the next we'll be talking about flooding, causes of flooding, case studies of flooding in the past, effects and impact of flood, protection against flood, methods of flood protection, drought, causes of drought, effect and impact of drought, and the working solution against drought. Well, this is a table 1. It's a summary of the extreme event we'll be discussing, which is drought and flood, causes and problem. As you can see, we have causes such as urbanization. The causes are grouped into three: urbanization, climate change, and human behavior. And for the first one, drought, we have the problem and the working solution. Likewise for the flood. For the problems under the extreme event, we have the urban heat island, and one of the solutions is the green areas recovery. We have water scarcity as the problem, and one of the solutions is the water saving in water supply system. We have the poor water system, poor water usage, and one of the solutions is educating the citizens about the importance of good water management and usage. Likewise, for the flood, we have intense impermeability as one of the problems, and the solution is permeable area recovery, sensitive urban design, intense precipitation. That's one of the problems, and one of the solutions is retention tanks, the use of retention tanks, and also we have the immigration camps, and one of the solutions is the invention of low-cost technologies. At the immigration camps, there are a lot of issues regarding waste management, less water availability, and one of the proposed solution is the use of low-cost technologies. Flooding. There are basically two types of flooding. We have the coastal flooding and the river flooding. The coastal flooding is when the water exceeds the average sea level, while the river flooding is when the water exceeds the bank flow capacity. And we have the causes of flood. We have the natural and the anthropogenic. Under the natural, we have heavy rainfall, the overflowing of rivers, storm surge, melting of the snow and ice. And under the anthropogenic, we have the dam breach, we have poor urban drainage system, deforestation, channel with steep sides. Well, of recent, there are a lot of cases of flooding all over the world, but we try to take you back to the memory line to let you understand that this has been a persistent problem of humankind, and that's why I decided to take some past events that occurred in 1642 and from 1642 to 1968. And we have cases in India, Italy, the northern Europe, the northern China, and some other places in China. So it is this problem has been a major problem in Asia because they have good documentation, and one of the problems we have in other parts of the world is, such as Africa, is poor documentation. So in the past, there are a lot of documentation from the Asian part of the world and the Europe. Effects and impact of flood. We have economic loss of river, environmental degradation, displacement, evacuation, and migration of persons from one place to another. We have the health hazard and destruction of infrastructures. Flood management strategies. There is a little individuals can do regarding flood management strategies. Most of these strategies should be governmental based, which can be in different areas. We have the local government, the state government, and the federal government. So if the federal government and the state government can work hand in hand to reach a compromise or consensus regarding this, then flood management will be more effective. These are example of 12 actions to managing this particular hazard, flood. We have subsidized flood insurance for farmers because most of the times when we have cases of flooding, it affects individuals more than the government. For example, it affects people in the industries, it affects farmers and households. So one of the proposed solution is that most of our items, our businesses should be insured. So if there are losses in this regard, some or part of the losses can be paid back through insurance policies. Also, point number 7 is educating of the community. For example, one of the problems is that we have a poor waste disposal system, such as dumping of waste in the drainage system, and at the end of the day, they get blocked. And when we have high rainfall, they flow the flow becomes blocked, and we have water getting off the banks, and that could lead to flooding. A method of flood prevention can be grouped into two. We have the behavioral and the structural. Regarding the behavioral, we have this important one. That's the first one, accepting loss. I think one of the major problems after flooding is that some individuals get depressed, and a lot of times it could lead to suicide. So there's a school of thought that believes that whenever you have such losses, you should, first thing to do is that you should accept that, okay, fine, this has happened, and you should take it. So in order to recover fast, like, okay, fine, I've lost some properties, I have to move on, I have to get some other things doing, life continues, and don't get depressed. Because when you get depressed, then it could lead to some more complicated issues. Education, that's part of it, efficient town planning system, flood forecasting and warning, flood insurance, that's the behavioral. For the structural, we have dam building, dikes, which could be permanent and temporary. For example, in Germany, we have the temporary dike system. There is the channel enlargement, channel straightening, barricades, flood planning, zoning, and reforestation. Reforestation is one of the natural ways of preventing drought. Causes of drought: reduction in rainfall, reduction in surface water, and climate change. My colleague will go on with this presentation.
Thank you. The second aspect of our presentation is looking at extreme events. Is drought. This drought is basically an extreme situation where we have scarcity of water, which impact on human life and the environment. Okay. So I will start with effects of an impasse of flood. One of the major effects or impacts that drought can have is low crop yield or crop failure. I believe this has been experienced in different parts of the world at different times. If rainfall, especially in areas that are primarily dependent on rainfall farming, it could also affect irrigation farming. But if there is drought, definitely this is going to impact crop yield, and it can actually lead to crop failure. This is an example of what we have here. Loss of livestock can also result from that. Most of the time, if there is no water available for livestock, it can end up in destruction of livestock. There is also water crisis. There could be crisis between communities and individuals as a result of scarcity or drought. And navigation into the river may become difficult or impossible depending on the intensity of the drought. This is a situation where the river has dried up. So if there are some communities, rural communities, that the connection between them is largely by river, and they have to go by small boats and the rest. So if the level of the river goes down to the extent that these things cannot function, it affects the way of life of the people there. It can also lead to a high rate of migration. If there is drought in an area, the tendency is for people to move. So this has an impact on the migration. Then electricity generation, this is basically having impact on the hydroelectric power generation. If the level of water drops, automatically the amount of energy that can be generated will also drop. So what are the solutions? There are three major solutions that we highlight here for drought. First of all, education on water use and conservation, because if the population are aware of responsible water usage, this can be a way to reduce the impact of drought. The drought forecast can also be very helpful if the people are aware that, like the situation that they talked about in Cape Town. They were informed that in so number of days, the city will run out of water. So they can take concrete steps towards limiting the impact of the scarcity. Then water conservation, which is the final solution that we are proposing here, and this can be approached from wastewater recycling, desert landscaping, low flow appliances, and then policies that promote water conservation. In conclusion, while it may not be possible to completely prevent extreme events like drought and flood, however, considerable measures to prevent and limit their impact can be put in place. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now the last but not least.
Morning to everybody. Our group, we are members of Group 4. Our name is Eco-Friend Group. We are going to present, or let's say our presentation will be on water security and human rights. So the group is composed by Dr. Z from Egypt, Ramiro, Brazil, Yakuba from Burkina Faso, Tampo from Togo, and Venyo from Togo too. So when we look around the world nowadays, majority of people consider internet access as a human right. So we can see here on this map that almost more than 80% in all the continent consider this internet access as human rights. So the question arising is, what about water? We think that water should be more than human right. So what is human right to water? Formally acknowledging water as a human right and expressing the willingness to give content and effect to this right may be a way of encouraging the international community and government to enhance their effort to satisfy basic needs and to meet the sustainable development goals. So when we talk about human right to water, what is it? First is to have sufficient water, safe, accessible, and affordable water. So what is sufficient means that we have water in quantity, and according to the United Nations, the minimum need for each one of us is 20 liters per day as for the basic needs of human being. So when we talk about affordability, water is about technology that's money, and we have to buy it. It's a good. So now, according to United Nations, the water cost should not exceed 3% of the, maybe I can say the salary of a man. And in maybe you want
30%, 3% of the household incomes.
Okay, 3% of the household income. So, but in our group, we think this 3% is almost high, because 3% the household income is very high for water, for access to water. And when we talk about accessible water, that means the aesthetic of water, the color, the smelling should be acceptable. And here we have to consider also the gender aspect, like cultural aspects also, and how the system which are used to provide water should be a system that is acceptable by the community. And according to maybe some hazard also, we have here an example for the total dissolved solid. So water should have, the degree of mineralization of this water should be good for human, like for the taste, and also to prevent from any hazard. And water should be accessible in quantity. Normally, to get water, we should not go far from 1 kilometer away. Water should be near people, near the communities. And here we can see how people may go far away before get water from. Water should also be safe. That means there is no threat for human health, no bacterial or chemical or radiological hazard for women. And this is the maybe definition of human right to water. And what did we know? We have to give some example of some case studies around the world. And in sub-Saharan Africa, millions of people share their domestic water source with animals and rely on unprotected well, which may bring some health hazard. Here in this picture, we can see this is somewhere in Togo, and we can see people taking water, and we have also animals around. They are using the same water, and this is not good for. We have also in Asia and Africa, many walk around like 6 kilometers before getting water, while when we talk about right to water, it's the maximum distance should be 1 kilometer. So in some parts also, like in Mozambique, people rely only on 10 liters of water per day, while in some developed countries like in Europe, we have people with 200 to 300 liters of water per day. This is the situation, and we see that in most of developing countries, this situation is not so, I can say, interesting. Maybe I'm not using the good word, but this is due to my limited English. Thank you. And now, when we talk about challenges also are the main, maybe when we talk about sufficient, safe, accessible, affordable, challenges just maybe summarized as how this could be reached. We can say how we can get sufficient water or accessible water, which are the opportunities we are using, and how we are implementing this, and what are limiting the opportunities that we have to achieve these objectives. Challenges. Okay. Thank you. So for us in our group, we have discussed and we tried to summarize all the solution in 5 points. The first of all is to implement sustainable technologies which have low cost and affordable for all communities. We need good government and public politics so that we have also to share information and have networking like what we are doing now. We are sharing information, and this will help a lot. And we need also new water source, like to try to find new water supply systems. We can try also example water reuse systems. And we also think that education is very important so that people especially in developing countries, water security, or I can say human right to water can be achieved. So we also asking you in the third part, we think that you have also solutions for that. So our questions to you is, which are the solutions you can propose so that we complete our list here? I don't know if you have to give the word. Okay. So this is what we have done in our groups. We like to give our conclusion, the overall conclusion. And what we conclude here is that there is no military solution for water. There is no military solution. And by this, we would like to say thank you for your kind attention.
Okay, now I'd like to make some comments about the presentations. I think it was very interesting the way that you work together. Some groups, they showed special characteristics, special features of each local, and also you had the opportunity to make the links with the SCG. It's very interesting because you are linked with with this connection, and for each group, I would like to make a comment. The working group number 1 that talked about the extreme events, drought and loss. The examples, particular examples that you showed, and even about the solutions, you could connect with what with the lectures that you had here. I like the background of the slides with that waves that you had to care to choose a special background to show your strong pictures, no? Because sometimes, depending on the region, we are not facing the same reality. Sometimes we are facing different conditions. You are not aware about these problems. Working group number 2 that talked about water quality and distribution. Also, it was very interesting to talk about the other losses, other problems, about another issue that I didn't mention so much during this meeting, that it was the population growth. So it's very important to show and keep in mind the alternatives for water conservation first place, and after considering the water reuse, as you said, as we discussed here during these days. Working group number 3 also that talk about the microcontaminants of potable water and the problems that they talked not only about the problems but also the possibility to provide sustainable alternatives for treatment of these waters. We know that a lot of problems relate to sanitation that we have strongly affects the public health of more remote regions. So if our politicians or governments had more investment on sanitation, basic sanitation, we would have less problems with health. Working group number 4 also that talk about water security and human rights, and I like so much our comparison with the human right with the access internet, and because nowadays we have Wi-Fi, but in so many places we have severe problems with water sanitation. This question with human rights, it was very well mentioned on your group, so I liked it so much. And the working group number 5 also, they talk about the lack of sewage collection, treatment, and possibilities of centralized or decentralized treatments. Also, you made a connection with so many things that we discussed, and show the different alternatives, because we do not have a simple solution for everything. We need to choose a solution depending for each case or each reality. So I think it was very interesting, and I'd like Professor Marcelo will tell you about the instruction I'm going to send you later, but I'd like you to send us your presentation, because we want to keep it together as the result of this workshop, like it was mentioned. This is very interesting to us to keep it in mind, and that we can share the pictures that I took as well. So now I'd like to open for any comments. I know that I was holding the plates 1 minute, 2 minutes, and they were a little bit nervous, but I think it was very important that you had the opportunity to come here in front of everybody to discuss, to see how is the world here and in a different point of view. So it's very interesting. So Professor Rodolfo, please, could you?
Thank you. Congratulations. I will give you some very general comments for everyone. One thing that I noticed is that perhaps it's only my perception and only the presentation, but you are working a lot with receptors and consequence, but not about sources, drivers, Because if you don't have a correct diagnosis, it's very, very complicated to face a problem. For example, when you were talking about climate change, the relation was directly to extreme events. That is an episodic. It's an episodic event. What happens with chronic processes? For example, when we have a tendency, sometimes it's worse. That change over the time. For example, I put an example. An episodic event can be when you broke a leg or an arm. You go to the doctor, and 3 months later you are very well. But if you have, for example, a cancer, it's a chronic event that perhaps take a long time to develop. But we are not looking that part that, to me, also is very, very important to face. We are looking, for example, water, but we are not looking the related processes, for example, the expansion of the tropics. The temperature is changing in the world, and the tropics are moving to the poles, and the wind, the atmospheric pressures, the water, the climate is changing, and we have to look those processes that are long-time processes. And in the other, my suggestion is that the best way to face this kind of challenge is to try to have a simple balance of matter and energy. And if you do something as simple as that, you start to see what is happening in the short and in the long term, what is changing with episodic events. To me, is sometimes it is impressive how the people spend time with very extreme events, and we are not very sure that is part of the nature, the normal processes, and is ignorance, or is part of the climate change. But this small tendency also, for me, is quite important. My suggestion is like that. Perhaps one way to work also is to see the sources, the pathway, to put a receptor and to see all the consequences. Perhaps with a very simple scheme to work. That is my suggestion and my comment. But perhaps I am wrong and it's only part of the presentation.
Well, in my opinion, by the time the groups had to work on these topics with different people with different backgrounds, areas of expertise, different kinds of experience. I mean, the main idea was to also to put people together to share experience. I mean, we, with this short time, didn't have the expectation as well to address the full worldwide problems. So I believe that the goals was achieved in this activity as well, because we also wanted to frame our proposal here was to work under the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals number 6 and number 7 mainly. Access of people to drinking water in quantity and quality, and also to the sanitation. I mean, in Brazil and many Latin American, when we say sanitation, means much more than wastewater collection and treatment. But yeah, I think it was a good opportunity for people with more experience, more academic, other with less academic experience to know each other, to get information, to learn from one country to another, from one region to other. So I mean, in my understanding, I enjoy the presentations. Yeah, I think you guys work it well, and yeah, I'm quite satisfied with the results so far. It's open for questions. Yep. Because we are record, we should always say our name again, please. Have you been recording it? Yeah.
So I introduce myself. My name is Nkeze Nyochembeng, also known as Charles, from the University of Yaoundé 1 in Cameroon.
Ask your question.
Oh. I didn't know that you called me because of my question.
We're ready
Sorry.
for it.
My question was meant for the group. I don't know which group it was again. The group that was working on waste disposal and things like that. And you showed, I think it's your group. You showed some pictures of the situation, the raining situation.
Maybe working group number 1?
The working group that was dealing with water and waste, and they showed pictures of plastic waste and some other waste. That's a group. Well, I'll make it a general question. I want to find out if any studies have been done to correlate wastewater relief and waste disposal practices, because there is a phenomenon happening in Cameroon whereby, although there is anarchical waste disposal that influences the quality of groundwater alongside the nature of the building of toilets, we are beginning to realize sinks because valleys, when there is rain, for example, it flushes most of the waste, plastic waste and things like that, to valleys, and it forms a depot, and the government is doing nothing about it. And we are realizing that these depots are going through transformation processes, and we are trying to find out, could these depots have an indirect influence on the quality of groundwater in the near future? So I just thought I should raise a question as a point for brainstorm and for concern. If somebody is working in that domain or somebody has read something on that domain, it could be of inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you.
It might link quite well to work that gets done on solid waste sites. So the impact of pollution on groundwater from solid waste sites. I don't know if there'll be anything directly on your particular what you're talking about, but it's the same. It's the same idea. It's concentrating this sort of material in an area and trying to determine what impact that would have on groundwater infiltration.
Here in Brazil, we have a national act about waste disposition, and we have to end up with all these areas of disposal, regular disposal to sanitary landfills. And these areas where you used to, this impacted area where we used to dispose our waste are now being recovered. And yes, we have impact on the groundwater. And what we're trying to do is collect the most we can of the residue and treat it before, not to clean it all. It's difficult to make a right disposal of these residues, but all we trying to clean the most possible, the most you can. But I don't know if there is specific work on this. And the location of landfills are licensed, but they have to follow some rules and standards that are already defined here. I don't know if there's something else.
Okay. Well, we are approaching the end of our workshop, at least the theoretical part of it. We still have the visit. We all would like to remind remind that we still have to work on some small details regarding the template of the full paper that you all should submit to us, and then it will be part of a chapter of the book, series book from the Exceed. We will send the email some instructions regarding this topic. I think it will be too long to discuss this format detail. So we'll have more or less the outline in order to have a kind of a standard of size, quality, and so on regarding the topics. So you should receive from us something in the next few days. And, well, I don't know if anybody has any comment before we just finalize. If anybody wants to say something regarding the workshop, some comments, suggestions. No? Okay. On behalf of the organization committee of this workshop, I would like to first thank you very much, all of you, for coming, for being here these days, coming from many parts of the world, and working hard and be present and discussing, very active. For us and for me especially, was a pleasure to be here hosting this workshop, and I hope we have the opportunity to meet soon and other Exceed seminars or workshop or conference or meetings here in Africa, in Asia, in Mexico, all right? So I really would like to thank the Institute of Advanced Studies, Instituto de Estudos Avançados of University of São Paulo, for allowing us to be here all these days. I would like, in the person of Professor Plonsky, Professor Saldiva, and Professor Filippi, for opening this door for us. I have also a special thanks for the staff of the Institute, the person of Sandra, Sergio, Rafael, that made us this time much better with their support. I really thank you, my wonderful students, Gabriel, Beatrice. Thank you so much. And also, they are not here. Amanda and Julio also helped us. My thanks for them. Thank you very much also for Exceed Swindon for support this meeting. Rodolfo, a person as the Latin American. My colleagues from the Exceed coordination, all of them, they are here. Andreas, and my colleagues here, Elvis, Ernesto, that is not with us right now, for the planning and all the activities that we took together to work on this workshop. And yeah, all of you will have the full information record from 1 to 2 weeks will be available at the homepage of this institute. So you go there to look for events or the media material. You are going to find yourself recorded during this period. And so hope they cut if someone was sleeping or brushing the noisy or something like that.
Everything you said, everything you typed at WhatsApp, everything is recorded. We know everything now.
So I really thank you very much. And now we have 5 minutes walking from here in the direction of the restaurant. We have stopped by for take a look to the Symphony Orchestra of University of São Paulo. I think it's just starting, and we can stay there. Not the full presentation. Maybe we can stay like a little bit, 20 minutes or something, and we go to the restaurant. And by 2 or 2:15, the bus will pick us up at the same place of the last few days and take us to the hotel. We can change the clothes, put some more comfortable, and we go to Ibirapuera Park, and there is some museum and things and walking, and there are at least three exhibitions there. We can choose which one. There is one I heard that's very interesting, is the Afro exhibition. It's regarding the Afro culture here in Brazil, but there are others as well. So, and by 6 o'clock, the bus will pick us up in the same place and take us to the hotel. So I don't know if my colleague have some words to say, or someone else.
Yes, the meeting continues with these practical activities. Tomorrow you have the technical visit, so
okay.
We still have time to contact if you remember something during these days till tomorrow. And for the ones that are leaving today, maybe tomorrow or on Sunday, have a safe trip back home. But we still have time together, so we still have time to connect each other, to talk, to exchange information, details, and that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.